passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, and welcome back to Franchise Euphoria, where we are all about helping entrepreneurs build businesses that scale and grow, oftentimes through franchising. We just love doing that. And, on today's episode, we're going to talk about when is franchising a bad idea? So often we look at things in terms of, when can I franchise my business? I'm definitely going to franchise my business. How am I going to grow? How am I going to build? Well, today we're going to kind of take a step back and say, when is franchising not a good idea? And how do you know with your business? Well, before we get into that, though, it is July 1st, 2014, and it is so hard to believe that 2014 is now over halfway over. I mean, it just seems like yesterday when it was New Year's Eve and we're turning the corner into 2014 and, all these thoughts going through, your head about opportunities, 2014, dreams and goals and what you're going to try to accomplish. And now we're halfway through. So what a great time to stop and think and ask yourself, are you where you want to be at this point in 2014? I know for myself, I'm not exactly where I want to be, but I'm getting there. And I think that's a big part of why we put down and write down goals and dreams and time frames and timelines to achieving certain things. So I think before we get into this episode on whether or not franchising is a bad idea, I think it's a great time of the year for you to sort of stop, take a deep breath and say, where am I going for the remainder of 2014? And have I gotten to where I want to be at this point? And if not, that's okay. But now is a good time for reflection on the first 6 months and say, what have I been doing? What should I be doing? And sort of do a refocus so that you can end 2014 really, really strong. I think this is really important for business owners, for entrepreneurs, especially people who are just getting started. I mean, it's just so hard to stay focused on what it is you're trying to do, you set out to do, because so many of us suffer from the bright, shiny object syndrome, where very quickly you find different things and it takes you off your main course, your main message. I know that's happened to me so many different times, and I'm constantly pulling myself back in, ringing myself back in, or reeling myself back in, as if somebody was, fishing me out of the lake or the pond. But anyways, just sort of food for thought there. By the way, I had some real good feedback on my my franchising for food truck episode last week. So if you didn't get a chance to hear that, I think you should tune in. I'm going to do a follow up to that, as it's such an interesting area in franchising. So look for some follow up episodes on that. And additionally, there are some big things happening in the franchise euphoria world, which I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of a teaser right now, but there are some major things in the works. One of which is I'm going to have a co-host coming up soon, who's actually a partner now in my Franchise Euphoria business, and we are going to be bringing it each week. Here's the deal. I realized as I launched Franchise Euphoria, the podcast, and then started getting some different business opportunities, that this was eventually going to grow to a point where it was going to be very, very difficult for me to manage my law practice and the opportunities that would come about through Franchise Euphoria. So early on, I turned Franchise Euphoria into its own LLC, its own company. And I reached out to a great friend of mine named Joe Levin, who I've known for over 20 years. And we first met right after college when we both began our careers working for a very large computer software company in Chicago. And all the way back then, 20 years ago, we talked about one day going into business with one another. And that has materialized over the last several months. So 20 years later, and we finally were able to turn that dream into a reality. And we're going to talk more about all that and uncover our story, as I plan on having Joe on the show and doing an introduction before he starts co-hosting. But I think you guys are going to find tremendous value in having a co-hosted show, because not only are you going to get the opinions and the thoughts from myself coming from, a franchise attorney background, an entrepreneurial background, small business background, but you're also going to get the opinions and thoughts from somebody who's been on the corporate side of things for now 20 plus years. He's been with the same company that we started with out of college and maybe it hasn't been 20 years. I mean, it was back in 1998. So yeah, it hasn't quite been 20 years, but I've known him for, I'd say 16 years, 17 years, a long enough time. And he's been with the same company the entire time. And he's been with them in a sales role and was very successful with that. And then moved into a marketing role and an operations role and an e-commerce role. So he brings a tremendous amount of experience. He's got an MBA in marketing, he's got an operations, and he's got all sorts of great experience, which ties in so well to franchising. So I really believe that having both of us now involved in the show is going to provide that much more value to you, and you're going to get on a continuous basis 2 points of view, 2 vantage points, which I think will be tremendous. So in any event, really exciting stuff. That's what's coming down the pipe. So you can expect some changes here for the better, and a new sound, a new feel, and a new co-hosted Franchise Euphoria podcast here coming very, very soon. Well, let's get right to it. Let's get into, when is franchising a bad idea? So as I talked about earlier, a lot of times people reach out to me and they may not be sure whether they want to franchise. They know they want to grow. They know they're at a position in the business where they've been successful in some respect, and they're thinking about what's the next level that we go to? How do we position ourselves to grow in a responsible and profitable and effective way? And a lot of times I come into the equation and we look at the entire business. We look at what its core operations are, what its core processes are, what the business is really all about. And we make a determination at that time whether or not franchising is a good model or a bad model. And so I think that's a really important point, because I don't want to always be sounding like franchising is a great model for everybody. It is not. And really, there's 3 things, if I had to break down franchising, that makes it a great model for businesses. You as a business have to have a simple, repeatable, and profitable business model. Simple, repeatable, and profitable. If you look at every successful franchise out there, it's a simple process that's repeatable and profitable. It's the idea that you're going to take something and somebody who has no experience in that particular business can now buy the franchise and run it profitably if they have good management skills. It's not the whole business in a box kind of thing, because you are running your business, but at its core, a great franchise business has to be simple, repeatable, and profitable. And really, I came up with 3 ways to sort of measure against whether your business is simple, repeatable, and profitable, and more importantly, how you can get it there. So in other words, if you're looking at your business and you're saying to yourself, well, we have a profitable business, but it's anything but simple, which, trust me, a lot of businesses are like that. I think one of the first thing that you need to look at is, where can you cut the fat, as they say. I mean, you need to take a crystal clear snapshot of your business and say to yourself, what do we do? What are we all about? What do we stand for? It's so easy to say that. It is hard to do that. It's funny. I look around at all sorts of businesses and you can just see when a business gets off kilter a little bit, when when they're going strong, they have a focus, they have a niche, they have a core, what they're all about. And then all of a sudden they just stray a little bit off into areas that you might not think that they go into. I think part of that is they've had a taste of success and they want more success. And so that's why it's hard to stay really, really focused. My philosophy on this is sort of the 80-20 rule. And it's not that you look at what is 80% profitable and then cut the 20% that's not. You need to look at what is 80% most profitable and then cut the remaining 20%. So there's a distinction there. So you may have a business model where every aspect of it is profitable. You may have an 80% component that's profitable, and you look at the remaining 20% and you go, oh yeah, I mean, we're doing this other thing, but it's profitable. I think what most people default to in that instance is to keep doing what they're doing because everything is profitable. I take a counterintuitive approach to that. I say focus on what's most profitable and get rid of the rest. Because if you are focusing on what's most profitable or what you are best at and you double down on that, I think you have a much better chance of success long term than doing other things that may be profitable but aren't quite as profitable as what your most profitable arm of the business is. So the number one thing you need to do if you're looking to simplify your business is to cut the fat. The second thing is you need to systemize. You need to process. You need to look at every aspect of your business and figure out, is there a system? Is there a process for that? I was listening to a great podcast called On Trade Leadership, which is put on by Dave Ramsey and the folks over there. And they were talking about examples where something with one of their businesses, somebody made a mistake or something didn't go as planned, and the individual who was responsible for it went up to Dave Ramsey and said, hey, I'm really sorry. I screwed this up. We'll fix it next time. And his response was, it's not about blame. It's about systems and processes. What can we do to put a system and process in place so that this doesn't happen again? And I think that just hits the nail on the head. And again, this is something that's easier said than done. I can talk all day about putting systems and processes in place, but I know firsthand it is hard to do because it requires you as the entrepreneur to not only think about everything that you do, but also think about what your team does and how they do things and be able to put something in place that's going to be effective and that you continuously do over and over and over again. So it's like you have to train yourself as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, to do things in a repeatable way, which most entrepreneurs are not like that. Most entrepreneurs just sort of do things however they want, however the wind blows. But I'm telling you that if you're going to turn your business into a franchise, you need to systemize and process every aspect of your business in terms of operations, in terms of marketing, in terms of what you sell, in terms of every single aspect of how your business operates needs to be systemized and put into a process. And number 3 is you just need to have such a crystal clear and focus on the bottom line. I see a lot of businesses, especially ones that are starting off and are off to a good start, that go a little off kilter when they take their focus away from the bottom line and start looking at other aspects that may or may not be good for the business. This is not to say that the entire purpose for having your business is to make as much money as possible. I mean, at the end of the day, the purpose for a business, the general purpose for a business is to make money. Okay. So for a for-profit business, if you're not in it to make money, then you have a hobby or you have a not-profit. But it's not to say that you need to focus on the bottom line to the exclusion of everything else. But you need to have a crystal clear focus if you want to franchise your business on what drives the bottom line. What are the activities that directly lead to money coming into the business? That is super important in terms of setting your business up as a franchise. And if you have multiple streams of income or multiple ways in which revenue comes in, is there a way to simplify that so that it can be repeatable for somebody else to implement? So to summarize, essentially, the point of this podcast is to give people just a little bit of a different vantage point and maybe do a little bit of a self-assessment on your own business and ask yourself, not necessarily how can I grow, but am I positioned to grow? Because if you're not in position to grow, if you don't have a simple, repeatable, and profitable model, you simply will not be successful in franchising or in any other expansion. So instead of asking yourself, how do I grow? Ask yourself, are we positioned to grow? And that will directly tell you if franchising at this stage of the game is a good or bad idea. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And like I said, a lot of exciting things coming down the pipe. We've even got, and I failed to mention this at the outset, but franchiseeuphoria.com is actually going to be broken away from indiefranchiselaw.com. So right now, if you go to franchiseeuphoria.com, it just sends you it forwards to indiefranchiselaw.com, which is for my law practice. But we are breaking that away in the process of creating its own, not only website, but community and resources and all sorts of fun stuff going on. So anyways, as always, would love to get your thoughts and input. So please email me at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. I will be quick on the response and definitely appreciate the input. And until the next time, happy franchising.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.